All right, welcome everyone. So tonight's session, we're going to primarily focus on college planning for divorced families. My name is Crystal Tate, and my company is called Crystal Clear College Planning. I have been doing college planning for 13 years at this point in time, and I typically teach a class called How to Pay for College Without Going Broke, where we focus more on college admissions meets financial aid in terms of that overall process. And the divorce piece always comes up. And I'm like, yeah, we could do like just a whole session on that. So then I decided, well, why don't we do that? And that is why we're here. So some background on me is I graduated from Western Washington with a degree in finance. And I actually went through college as in the whole process being a student from a divorced household. So I have that experience of having lived it. But then I also have the experience of working with many families on the strategies that we want to start talking about of how you can put financial aid into perspective within the context of divorce and some of the important things that come up on a regular basis. So we're going to go through those today. So our overall goals is understanding, well, which parent's financial information is going to be reported on financial aid forms, understanding, like I said, those strategies on how we can optimize the financial aid in that process, and then discussing those challenges that typically will come up and how we can address them. So first we have to cover the baseline understanding of the different types of financial aid. So the first bucket over here is grant. So this is need-based aid that does not have to get repaid. And so if we can qualify for the need-based aid, that's one bucket in regards to money. Scholarships, also known as merit-based aid in my world, is the money that's coming directly from those universities that it does not have to be repaid. And I should clarify, grants can be federal, Pell, state, as well as college specific. So there are kind of three different buckets of monies that we can get in regards to where grant money can come from. And then merit-based scholarships, this is solely based from the institution themselves and them giving merit aid. And then loans being that money that we borrow and then have to repay either as a student or a parent. And then work study is that part-time on-campus job. And I will say that I have had students that don't have financial need be able to qualify for work study. I feel like this is kind of more of a sliding scale that's pretty slidey. Where in all reality though, like I have a girl who's at University of San Diego where she was one of our divorce study cases essentially. And her job really for work study, like they just cut her a check, right? So she's paying for her incidentals. It's not going towards the cost of room and board or tuition. So that's something where you just kind of have to realize, yes, they'll package that in with my award offer, but often they're using that for all of the fluffy stuff. So it's kind of less often coming off of that overall sticker price in regards to that cost. What about third party outside of government school aid? So that would be more of the scope of outside scholarships. So this here is where we're talking about what we're going to see specifically from universities themselves and the aid that we would get there. Because what we're talking about is strategies within college selection, as well as positioning ourselves on financial aid forms and aid, especially as a divorced family, what they're going to look at and what they're not. And these are the kinds of money that that's going to impact. So outside scholarships are just in addition to another opportunity for you to bring down the cost of college. So within the FAFSA and the CSS profile, these are the two financial aid forms that we encounter in this process most typically. So the FAFSA is the federal form that is used to determine federal and often state-based aid. And then the CSS profile is used by a few hundred schools where this is going to be more based on institutional aid. So this is where an institution that gives need-based aid for their own need-based calculation can choose, if they don't want to use the FAFSA, they can choose to use the CSS profile. So it just calculates out differently and it has different levels of questions within that. The one piece that it should be on here as an addendum to the CSS profile is what we call the CSS profile non-custodial financial aid form. So that is where when you are, we'll talk about this, when you're divorced, there's a custodial parent for the sake of financial aid forms and a non-custodial parent for the sake of financial aid forms. This is only going to be filled out for the FAFSA and the CSS profile by whoever is going to be determined as the custodial parent for the sake of financial aid forms. The other parent, the other party, does not have to fill out financial aid forms at all unless that institution asks for a CSS non-custodial financial aid form. So that is often a strategy, is understanding and teaching families, well, if we're comparing profiles for families and it's very obvious who we should use that has a lower income and asset profile where we'd qualify for more need-based aid, as long as the other parent isn't looked at, well, then we want to make sure that we have a nice amount of schools on our list that are only going to look at that one parent's income and assets, because when it throws in the other one, it could then increase our student aid index, which then decreases our eligibility for aid. Okay. So with that in mind, who gets reported on the FAFSA and why? So the definition for a custodial parent when it comes to the financial aid paperwork is the parent that provides financial support, the most financial support in the past 12 months. So if you split costs 50-50, then it's beneficial for us to look at then the financial situation of both parents to determine who it makes the most sense for to use in that situation. Because it's the thinking about as well, when you split expenses 50-50, even if you're the parent that's getting, say, child support in that situation, that's an equalizing payment, right? So that's what brings you guys both on equal playing field. So that doesn't count in regards to that overall circumstance. So then we're often looking at more in terms of that picture for, and I do this regularly. I actually have a client who I'm waiting on the information from the dad. So I'm working with mom and the kid, and then dad's providing me his financial information separately so that I can compare mom's information and what she gave me to dad's information. And nobody has to, see anybody else's stuff. It's just me saying, okay, well, looking at this overall picture, well, your student aid index is telling us that we want to be able to use mom for financial aid forms versus dad, and this is why. Because that's one piece of it. But then, like I said, kind of like that secondary piece is also going to be talking about college selection in terms of that strategy. And I'll give you some examples of a few different clients and some of those circumstances that have come up and how that's played out. But one of the killers is if so when it comes to income reporting, right, only, like I said, only the custodial parent for the sake of financial aid forms, income and assets is reported on the FAFSA and on the CSS profile. But if you get remarried, you've now hitched your financial wagon to somebody else. So that comes back to now the step parent's income and assets is going to be included in the FAFSA and the CSS profile, whether that was intended or not. So that's where I just got off of a call with a student and a dad who I'm going to say was smart in the grand scheme of things. He has a partner. He has a kid with that partner. He has not gotten remarried. So her information does not get calculated into the grand scheme of anything. So we were just looking at, and bio mom is homeless. And so we don't have to report her information either. So it comes down to just dad's income and asset profile. And his starts to get to that point where a lot of the strategy comes into play to say, we have to be smart then about, like, they gave me their list of schools and I'm all, no, because you're going to go and pay $55,000 to $65,000 a year for a flagship out of state. It doesn't matter what this number is right now. They're going to not give us any money, and this is why. And then we talked about our state schools, and then we talked about the different kinds of private schools. And so when you get into that category where you need it, right, their student aid index was less than $10,000. That's where you need schools that are going to fulfill need-based aid as well as merit-based aid for, he had a 3.8 GPA and a decent SAT score. He's a good candidate academically for a lot of schools that can give him money that's not just only going to cover tuition, but also some of room and board, versus at our state schools where he's not at the poverty level. Therefore, he doesn't qualify for the Pell Grant or state-based grants. So that's where that challenge becomes when you're kind of in that middle income bracket, and to start to understand that the kinds of schools that we apply to are important in understanding this strategy. And then this one comes up all the time. So tax dependency. The parent who claims the child on their tax return, I will hear that often, is the one that has to report in terms of financial aid paperwork. And the answer to that is no, that is not true. It does not have any impact on who's taking who in regards to a tax return for a deduction. This has to do solely with who is providing the most financial support in the past 12 months. And then we have to figure out who that really is, as I meet a lot of families where this is that case where the child support is an equalizer. They split expenses 50-50. And so now we have to look at who benefits the family to be used for the sake of financial aid forms at the end of the day. So if uninsured medical expenses are shared based on a non-50-50 proportional amount, the parent who is making more is automatically considered the custodial parent for the purpose of these forms. I see where you're going with this. So, I like to look at it more holistically in regards to kind of the rest of the financial picture and also just kind of the other considerations. I know that FAFSA often will have this cute little disclaimer where they will say, well, if you split it 50-50, then you should use the parent that makes more or has more in assets. Well, of course they're going to say that because they don't want to have to pay out money, right? Yeah, I got to realize who we're dealing with here. But that's why I like to look at it and as a bigger picture, and also just be able to have a frank conversation with a family. Like, this is the impact if you do it this way versus that way. So who do you want to win in this? You or the federal government? Okay. What if the one parent is not married but co-living with a new partner? So that goes back to what I was just saying here, was in all reality, if you are not remarried, that's smart. Okay. That is a great strategy in terms of this process, because then that person's information doesn't have to be included. So more in regards to understanding the CSS profile as well. So that's where this kind of reminder of, right, the non-custodial parent requirement will come in. And so there, you can go to College Board's website and you can actually go, like, in their search bar, type in CSS non-custodial and see the list of schools that require a regular CSS form and a CSS non-custodial. Okay. I have schools tagged in my system so I can see who is and who isn't pretty quickly. But this is where, like, a normal human would go and hunt out, like, well, what schools are non-custodial required schools? I want to avoid those. And then the college specific requirements as well. So each college can have different requirements within that CSS form as well for the information that they want. And there can be as well, of course, the special circumstances. So like I was just saying, mom was homeless, or I have another family where I'm working with the mom and the kid, and dad's remarried and lives in another state and is got a whole other life of stuff and doesn't like to provide financial support for his adopted daughter in ex-wife. So, like there's always a story, right? So this is where the college doesn't know if you don't tell them. And so there can be specific paperwork to be able to share, or like in their case, they will have to appeal like that there isn't significant financial support that is available. Like if another parent isn't going to provide that information, right? You have to be an advocate for yourself in that side of it in order to um, make sure that you're getting that maximum aid. So some strategies to think about in regards to this overall process is one is income shifting strategies. So if you think about the timing of income, whether you're going to receive a bonus or inheritance or some other such thing, our base year when it comes to the sake of financial aid forms is always 2 years back from your student's graduation year. So if you're a 2025 grad now, they're going to look at the 2023 tax return. And for when a student is going to, and then you're going to fill out those financial aid forms every year going forward. So this is something then to just look at, like the dad I was talking to earlier, he had some unemployment for his baseline year of 2023. So we calculated out his SAI was actually only about 4,500 for his baseline year, when it was about 9,500 for a typical year. So we talked about, well, how are they going to look at it this first year, what to expect the second year, and then what does that mean when it comes to these different kinds of schools that are on their list. And now, one of the perks, this wasn't the case until they made some updates here to the FAFSA, is you can actually now put money into retirement accounts, which will reduce your reportable income on your taxes. And now they're looking at your adjusted gross income on your taxes and the amount of tax that you paid in terms of calculating out our student aid index for that need-based qualification. So that's where this can come into play, as well as and I had a conversation with a parent about this, I think on Monday, where we were talking about, well, how much can we actually afford to move and still live and survive in order to qualify for Pell at that point in time, and see where that starts to get us. I love it. You guys are like, ooh, I've got all of the questions tonight. Let me get through this one and then I'll go to some questions. So some asset considerations. We've got the custodial parent asset. So this is the custodial parent is who we have to report for the sake of income, right, and asset profile. So that can then be how can we reduce down any of that reportable asset. So whether that be in paying down debt or moving stuff into retirement funds or cash value life insurance, there can be lots of fun conversation around what that could look like. And then 529 plans, who owns that can also be important. So like the dad that I was just talking to is a great like example pre this session, was I said, so I see you've got some 529 plan money and you said that that was contributed to by grandparents. Who owns it? And he's like, the grandparents own it. And I'm like, great. So now that makes that a non-reportable asset for the sake of financial aid forms. And now you have money set aside for college, but you don't have to report it. Right? Great. And then if we're in the midst of divorce and having to fill out all of that paperwork, it can be then a consideration for who can then hold on to the college savings plans because of this benefit, right? So if we've got one parent with, say, a lower income asset profile that would be more desirable to use for the sake of financial aid forms, and everything else is split 50-50. If there is a significant amount in a 529 plan, then we may want to consider having the non-custodial parent hold on to those funds for the sake of the kid in order to optimize our eligibility. Let's see. It looks like the FAFSA application requires that the parent give full access to all of his or her financial information the IRS has. If all is needed for FAFSA is the income over the last 2 years, I'm fine providing the tax returns for the last 2 years. However, I'm not comfortable giving unlimited access to my, so no, that's not the case. So what happens, so what they're doing, and we don't, a few years ago, I can't remember how long ago, they started to do what they call a data retrieval directly from the IRS, where they would ship your tax information over to the FAFSA, right? So they would talk to each other. We don't do that when we file financial aid forms for families on their behalf. What they are doing is, and we don't do it because you can't make changes to it then, and then it's and it blacks out everything. Like you can't see what's actually pulled, what the data actually that is pulled. So when it comes to the sake of filing the FAFSA, what is being used is that 2-year look back. So it is a 1-year snapshot in regards to your tax return. So if you're 2025 grad, you would be filling out your FAFSA here in December, and it would be asking for your 2023 tax return. And then it is a snapshot of assets at the time that you apply in December. So, and that's the case every year. Okay, it's just changing of that tax year and then that snapshot in assets at the time that you apply for the financial aid forms. Are you saying to take colleges off of your list if they will not support your child financially because applying to them is a waste of time or money, or because it is somehow damaging to your numbers? So it's a strategy in regards to, so I'll go back to the human that I was talking to right before this was, I said, so your student aid index is 9,500 and you have University of Georgia and Boulder on your list. I'm going to be the bearer of bad news and tell you that this is, going to be a school that is out of state tuition and will not give you scholarship for need or merit-based aid. So I'm saying if you cannot afford, or you do not want to go into debt to pay $65,000 a year for Boulder pricing, then I don't know why you're applying to it. Okay, because we know how that conversation is gonna to end up. If you get in, I mean, you can apply, right? You're just going to pay for the application fee, right? Fine, so be it. But I'm saying be smart about what you're curating on your list to make sure that you will have schools that are not all just in that category of like, well, I just want to see if I can get in. I know it's going to be expensive. If you didn't know it was going to be expensive, then it's time to have a reality around which ones will be that, so that you aren't getting your kid attached to a $60,000 a year school that we don't have the ability to afford. That's what I'm saying. And then, so if custody is 50-50 and expenses are 50-50, then on the FAFSA, you basically get to choose who you report. That's what I like to do. That's what I've done for 13 years. And that's why we look at comparing who is the best to use. But I will be honest, I will have conversations with families where I'm like, well, they both suck. They both suck. There's nothing good about either of these circumstances, because either one has too high of an income profile or one has too high of an asset profile, or the kid adamantly refuses to look at schools that aren't going to combine both of their income and asset profiles back together. And the parents are like, fine, I'm okay with that, right? So then it's family conversation about all of those fun dynamics and where things fall for sure. Sorry if I missed this, but in terms of timing, if a student is going to go straight to college after senior year of high school, is 2 years prior during your kid's sophomore or junior year? So it's always, so I'm going to say like, once your kid is, so if you're a 2025 grad now from high school, they're looking as a 2023 return, right? And then after each year, like you renew for financial aid forms for 2026, it's going to look at 2024. You're going to renew for 2027. And it's going to, right? So it just keeps rolling for those 4 years your kid is in school. How do we know what the cost of each school is? So all of that is reported by each of the colleges. My database has like that all-inclusive cost of tuition, room and board, miscellaneous expenses, books, and all of that. So it's one where, I mean, for you guys on your side at this point in time, it would be looking at the college's website in regards to their reported tuition and fees, as well as room and board costs. So understanding some of these special circumstances and appealing financial aid decisions. So this, for change of circumstance, if we do have job loss, reduced income, right, you have the ability to appeal a financial aid decision. And I will use that, Dad previously is the same kind of like opportunity where I discussed appeals with him, just because he is, I mean, he has a low student aid index, and that gives him an opportunity as well at the private schools. I said you can definitely appeal for need not met, and just see what comes back, because there's no harm in asking and seeing if there's an opportunity, because unless it's I think he had Rice on his list as like his crazy school. I was like, and those kinds of schools are filling more need-based aid, and those are the ones that are going to cover most of tuition and likely more in terms of this room and board cost in filling that gap. But a lot of the other schools don't always have that ability, and they're going to make you ask in order to see if there is anything else that frees up in order to get. I mean, the worst they can say is no. And then if we're in the middle of a divorce or separation, and it happens after the FAFSA is submitted, then it is sound advice to go back to the colleges that you applied to and their financial aid office and let them know of that change in household and financial circumstance. And I will say, was it last year? It was last year. I had, I don't know, 2 or 3 families that were in the middle of a divorce while we were working on this process. And so it was very interesting in dealing with like, well, when we got divorced, when we got separated, how can we work this system? And there was one family in particular, actually the girl that's at University of San Diego right now, where it went from like joint income and dad just got an inheritance from his mom passing away, and them having to pay, like it would have been insane at University of San Diego, their student aid index was high, to them having a really low student aid index and just using mom's income and asset profile to the point where it was like less than $10,000 a year for her to go. And then we had to appeal special circumstances again in the following year because of a higher reported income due to the divorce, right? So there's always like those things then can continue, and you will have to continue to yet again advocate for yourself, and making sure that you're getting the aid. Okay. Mm. Is there anything you recommend when one parent says they won't help pay for school at all in terms of the FAFSA or getting aid? It's always a fun circumstance. Pardon my sarcasm. So this is one where when it comes to the FAFSA and getting aid, it's the appeals process is really what this comes down to. So the other appeal that often will happen is single parent appeal, where and you have to realize that this works better at some schools than at others. When you are applying to state schools, if you aren't at federal Pell eligibility, if you're not in poverty level, the state schools can't do anything because they are mandated by state and federal regulation. Okay. The private schools are the ones that have financial aid discretion, is what we call it in this process. And so that's where, if you're filling out your FAFSA, it's only your information, Kelly, and that's what's getting submitted in terms of your income and assets. FAFSA isn't asking for dad's information, but if he's not willing to support the student just financially in general to go to college, the appeal to the university is like when I get my award offer back, I am a single parent. I am the only one that's going to be paying for college. I appreciate all that you have given, and I'm asking for extra consideration, right? So yet again, it's appeal in terms of these things. I'm still trying to understand the definition of a custodial, it is always defined by the person who pays the highest percentage of the child's expenses. Isn't measured by time spent. It is not measured by time spent. It used to be considered that way. And then they changed it to whoever covers more of the kids' costs. But we also kind of look at that yet again as a more holistic picture. What does that really mean for that family? So I prefer honestly to have conversations with people to kind of get that whole thing and then to talk about what really makes the most sense in that situation. How are assets reviewed on the FAFSA? I've done private school financial aid for high school, but wasn't sure about college. So it is assets are a snapshot in time from the time that you apply. And for the sake of FAFSA, the assets that are reported is brokerage, cash, and all of that. You do not report retirement in any capacity. So it's really just what you have in non-retirement accounts at the time that you file. If the custodial parent gets remarried while the student is already in college, does that change their financial aid package for the following year? It can if it had need-based consideration, yes. Because you have to refile financial aid forms every year that your kid is in school. If you qualify for need-based aid before and then you got married and then you blow it up, then you lose aid. How do you appeal the financial aid decision? So this is, which I'm not sure. Yeah. So when it comes to the financial aid, I'll talk about kind of like timeline process. This is my first time doing this presentation. So it's kind of like, what are all the extra things that I should be adding to like my slides as well as like the things that I'm saying? So I talk about it all the time, but like actually officially doing all of the stuff. So what happens is, and I'll say this year is an atypical year because FAFSA is delayed, so it is opening in December. On a typical year, you would be filing your FAFSA in October. And so what happens is you submit that financial aid form and you also submit the CSS profile if it's required, typically is around the November timeframe. The colleges get that information and then they're going to make your award package, and that's going to come to you often sometime kind of early spring of your student's senior year. So I've seen some as the early as January, not when it's delayed. So typically February, March, April is when you'll get these award packages from your colleges. And that's going to have the very beginning when I said all the different types of money, right? It's going to have a package of all the different types of money, as well as the cost of attendance. So at that point, you get this and you go, well, that's not good enough, or I have a special circumstance. And then you're going to write a love note and sometimes then provide proof of those things as requested. So sometimes they will ask for proof of divorce or separation agreement, proof of income change, and that sort of stuff will occur in that process. But that's part of where you also just have to be very proactive and very clear in your communication and explanation of those circumstances. So like when we were doing like the additional appeal at University of San Diego, I was like, good God, they had it like if you were appealing based on change in income, it was one set of documentation. And if it was a significant change in like medical expenses, then they wanted all of your expenses, including medical, and like you had to document all of the things. So they were getting very nuanced as they were then asking for all of this proof about the actual circumstance itself. Okay, and we've got some other kind of general scenarios. So let's see, what else do we have in here? For divorced parents who have a monthly child support payment as well as splitting expenses 60/40, are there artful ways to shift that split for the 12-month period of FAFSA considerations so that the parent with a lower household income is considered? So what's really fun here is just because your parenting agreement says that expenses or split 60/40 and that then there's child support. I will say that oftentimes that they're yet again kind of a better holistic conversation where it doesn't, one, never in the history of anything will a college ask for your parenting agreement or your divorce agreement for the sake of like your expenses in this way. They don't care that much yet. Okay. So at that point, this is all just interpretation of the data and what is best to report. So I think that that's always one of those fun, like, let's look at everything. And if there is a significant difference where it makes sense, let's look at the parent where we benefit in that circumstance. Yeah. They do consider real estate as an asset for in different ways. On the FAFSA, your primary house does not come into consideration. On the CSS profile, the equity in your primary house does come into consideration and can be capped at certain levels depending on the university, which they won't tell you what that is. So if you have $1 million in equity, they might only take 500,000. They might only take 250 of that. It's their choice. But any secondary properties, the equity in any secondary property in the States or out of the States, because I have somebody who was like, well, it's in Japan. Does it still count? Yeah, you still own it, still counts. So that's where that then gets reported as an asset on the FAFSA as well as the CSS profile. So secondary properties are a thing that kind of can crush us equity wise for the sake of qualification for need-based aid now. Does who is paying child support count as part of the determining the custodial parent? It does not. It does not. So what do I have in terms of this other example on here? I've been given lots of them as we go through, but remarried custodial parent. So yeah, so if we get remarried, then we have to report step parents' income and assets on the financial aid form. So if you insist on getting remarried, then one of those strategies is looking at, do we have any income or asset reduction things that we can do in terms of reducing our numbers in order to increase aid eligibility or not? Okay. And if the answer is not, then it kind of becomes you need to make smart choices about your college selection for schools that then in that point, you're going to be looking at merit-based aid opportunities. So what schools are going to give my student merit-based aid based on their level of shiny prettiness, seeing how I can't do anything to change my financial circumstance. Okay. And then this kind of goes, equal financial support. So the student is supported equally by both parents. So then we have to decide, well, which is going to be the best to use for the sake of financial aid forms, or where we have the opportunity to lower an income or asset profile. So I have had families where, and I'll say this, right? Like the FAFSA changed last year. So the strategies that we used, right, 11 years prior, I can't use all of those anymore because they changed it, right? So whenever those shifts and stuff happen, then we're dealing with what we've got. So there were some things we never used to be able to do that now we can, and vice versa. So there are some things like, now we have to report small businesses, so that even if you have your real estate in an S corp or an LLC to protect that asset, which is smart, we can't count it as a business and save ourselves in terms of reducing asset profile like we used to. It can benefit us, but the calculation is a lot harsher now than it was before, right? So some of that just is what it is because of the way they changed that ruling. So what we're really doing is just looking at, right, the federal government has given us all of these rules, and now what strategies can we ensue based on that family situation or not? So, and I will say some of the toughest conversations that I've had with families is when they just don't want to break their kid's heart about telling them that, like they've gotten eyeballs deep in college selection and search, and they've fallen in love with a school that, based on the circumstance, will be $80,000 a year. Where then I hear, well, I'll just pull money from my retirement or I'll sell my house. And I'm like, okay, so I feel like one, and this is just one parent saying, well, I'll sell my house over here. And we got the other parent going, yeah, like I can't do that, right? Like that. So, and now we've got one parent giving up everything for the sake of this dream to go to this $80,000 a year school, not willing to have these hard conversations around what is the value you are getting out of that? And is it worth it as a family unit? You're still a family unit, even when you're divorced, right? Making this decision with your kid, because this is going to impact everybody. So that is where I like to just kind of be able to say, like, these are clarifying conversations based on where you're at, what you're telling me you want, and what is reasonable and possible, given all of the things that we have to deal with. Okay. I may have missed this, but are you saying we can have the custodial parent be the one who makes less? And if so, only the custodial parent has to fill out the FAFSA? Yeah. In an ideal world, that is the life goal. Yeah. If you have a parent or grandparent living with you and are their caregiver, does the FAFSA take that into account? Actively, the way that that's reported is how many are in your household. And so in a way, yes, it does, but then that's also an appealable item because they don't know, like, as that that you are a caregiver and financially responsible for an additional human being in that way. So that is often a typical appealable item for the financial aid forms at the colleges specifically. Yeah. Okay, if there are two step siblings attending school at the same time, is that factored into the FAFSA at all? The answer is no. So when it comes to the FAFSA, one of the unfortunate changes that they made is that now the FAFSA, for the sake of federal or state aid, cannot take into consideration multiple kids in school at the same time. If that parent if you're looking at private schools, however, it goes back to my terminology where I said it's financial aid discretion. So that's where the university itself can then say, hey, you have appealed to me because you have 3 kids in college at the same time. And so I can take that into consideration as a college to determine whether, in my eyes, you have more need-based aid at my institution. So that's a college-specific appeal. And I think that that's kind of a great understanding, as well as there's only so much, right? Like, there's very specific data that they ask for on the FAFSA and on the CSS profile. You have to report it as such, right? It is a 2-year look back. It is the snapshot in assets, but changes happen in 2 years, right? And so people get married, people get divorced, people lose jobs, right? There's a lot of the things that happen, and there is standard appeals with those big circumstances that the colleges will take into consideration. And then there's also other kind of specialty appeals that you can throw into that as well, right? Like need not met, the single parent, and other things along that line. If not yet legally divorced, do we still apply as a household with both parents? Depends on how far we want to push the envelope. And kind of what that circumstance looks like. So I will say, so they go with, they ask divorced or separated. So if you are separated, that counts as well for the sake of this. And so, like, I'll use this as a situation. Is my USD kid, her parents were they were separated, still had to live in the same house until she graduated from college. And mom was then in the process of buying her own house and getting out of that situation. We said she was separated and living in a different place because we were like, this is not like the circumstance itself, like financially, that she couldn't leave until the kid graduated, right? Which was in June. So it was like the situation by the time the kid went to school was the truth. But it was in the moment of it, it was like, why we're going to ask for forgiveness if they ask anything, which they didn't, right? We'll ask for forgiveness if anything comes up, but we're going to state it as what will be true by when she is going, because in that situation, it didn't make sense to report both mom and dad's information, have to appeal that overall situation and hope for the best in preparation for like all of that happening at the same time when the kid was going off to college. So, right, like we push the envelope. And sometimes I will be honest, like that's a matter of comfort level with a family that I'm working with, where it's like, you can do this or you can do this. What do you want to do? And then they choose. And that was the smartest financial decision in terms of doing that. So if I understand, you were saying it's up to us kind of which parent to do the FAFSA. I'm the custodial parent, but my ex said he thought his family would need to do it because they made more two incomes. Yeah, no. And that's where I will say it's kind of fun. These are the not always fun for you guys, but they're fun conversations sometimes for me, because I get to see like all different sides of it. And I'll put the link in there so you guys have it. Is what I often will do is, and I leave it up to parents, and based on, I have had people that I met with, and I'm like, you submitted data, you said you were divorced, but what I'm seeing right now, I'm like, you guys are the most cordial family I have ever met. And then I've had others where I go, oh, yeah, I know why you're divorced. So it's more a matter of, you tell me the level of you sharing information or not sharing information with the other half. So if you guys share data and you guys both want to come and provide that, great. Just give me context of what I'm dealing with, and I am happy to keep information private and just be able to explain circumstance. Or if you guys share data, fine, then I just know that is what it is in terms of that conversation. But what I typically will do is I will ask for what I call a data sheet of information, and it has stuff in regards to the kid and colleges and all of that, as well as the financial picture. And so then I run the student aid index and I look at the stuff side by side, and we talk about kind of the rest of those circumstances as well to determine, well, what really makes the most sense based on all of that stuff. So yeah. And I'll put this in the chat again, because I know it probably got buried and people were coming and going. So the other resources, like I said, we recorded tonight. It's going to go out via Constant Contact, but it will also get posted to my YouTube and the Facebook group and the other stuff as well. So you're welcome to go utilize those resources. And then the link for scheduling a session is in the chat. You will also find it on my website. So that is, if you have any questions, you can always feel free to reach out and let me know. But this is definitely, if you have students that are, sophomores and juniors at this point in time, just getting ready for their college search, it's a great preemptive conversation when you're in this kind of circumstance, to be able to have those conversations before they get too attached to something that's not financially reasonable for your family. It's my nicest way I can put it. Also do death benefits from Social Security for my soon-to-be college student have to be included if I am filling out the FAFSA. It is a benefit from her now recently deceased stepdad. So if the Social Security benefits have to get reported on a tax return, then it has to get reported as income. If it's sitting in an account and not used at that point in time of filing a financial aid form, then it gets reported as an asset. So that would be those two places where it would show up. So only way it hits as income is if it has to get reported on a tax return at this point. Yeah. So I hope that you guys got some goodies from tonight. This was kind of a fun session, different than my typical how to pay for college without going broke. So I enjoyed it. And I hope to see some of you guys in the virtual reality to have some chit chats. So I hope you guys have a great night.